How's it going? And welcome to episode 144 of On the Wire, proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. Follow the pod on the Twitter at On the Wire Pod. I am Adam Howe. You can follow me at 80 grade. That's all spelled out. And Kevin Hasting is at Hasting Kevin on the Twitter. And we are back once again, Kevin. I am so incredibly happy we were able to fill our 15-team listener league at the buzzer, or maybe just after the buzzer, after review. We got that started the day after Christmas. So as I put on Twitter, it was a little bit of a Christmas miracle. Now we're already like 12 rounds in by the time we're recording this. It's been a good time.
Yeah, it's been fun, as it always is. Interesting as drafts can be this time of year. Seeing some of the player movement in ADP. I talked about last week, I am really trying even more diligently than in the past to try not to put too much stock into ADP, other than, of course, seeing what the market is on some players. But we're still early enough in draft season that there can be a lot of variance in that.
Oh yeah, and your words have been ringing in my ear this entire draft so far. And like I said, it's only 12 rounds in, but there's definitely some guys that I want to pull the trigger on really early. But I'm also mindful of being able to use ADP to your advantage. So like, I'm not pulling the trigger on like my next two picks 5 rounds early, even though I feel like I should, or I could, and I feel okay with it. But I don't have to. Like I as long as the rest of the room is still abiding by ADP a little bit more strictly than I feel like I need to be, then I can still get away with, holding off. And I haven't been burned yet. But like I said, it's only been 12 rounds. Still half the draft to go.
Right, and like I said last week, I know guys didn't go in the exact order of their rank default in the draft room. However, we are 183 picks into this draft. 4 players ranked in the top 183 players have not been drafted. That is how close the draft in general is sticking to ADP, and that was my point.
Yeah, there was the time all right. I mean, not to throw you under the bus, but you timed out for a pick or two ago, and it happened that you had the top guy in the overall queue as the top guy in your queue. So it worked out. So I'm like, maybe Kevin doesn't have a queue, because he ended up taking the top guy. He's like, no, I had a queue. Pretty happy about that. So that worked out the best. But that's you're saying, like, it wasn't that far off from the ADP. I think it was Ryan Helsley, and he was I will be honest, all the closers or all the relievers in general that have gone so far have dropped considerably from what their ranking / ADP is in the draft room. Helsley, like I said, was at the top of the order. But he was still, I don't know, I think he dropped like 2 rounds from his ADP. So it was still tight enough to ADP, like you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And apologies for that timeout. I know it happens. I don't get too bent out of shape over it. I do get frustrated with myself a little bit, especially on a day like yesterday, when the only reason is because I was out having fun. I have a buddy visiting. We've been playing golf all week, and I just completely forgot about the draft for a while we were on the golf course.
I got down to like the 20-minute mark, and I had multiple text messages or like DMs saying, hey, of course, these are all guys that are in the draft with me in the last time, where I timed out and ended up picking Jackson Holliday probably 4 rounds too early. And so I got all these messages saying, hey, hope you have Jackson Holliday in your queue, because you're about to time out.
Exactly.
That did not happen. I did not get Jackson Holliday this draft, but that's okay. All right. Well, we got lots of news to talk about as we take a week apart from these recordings. Of course, lots of stuff happens even over the holidays. So Kevin, let's hit on some of those things. One thing that happened, or at least it was announced probably like right after we recorded, was that there were a few new rules that are going to be applied to the 2024 season. And part of the collective bargaining agreement states that MLB can make these changes in the offseason prior to the season upon upon review, and they can just implement certain rule changes really without any, the players didn't approve of these, but didn't matter. They're still passing. They're still going to do it. So the ones of note that I'll mention is that they lowered the pitch clock with runners on base from 20 seconds to 18 seconds, giving a little bit less time for the pitcher to, set themselves and throw the pitch while there's a runner on base. Also, each team will only get 4 mound visits per game throughout the game instead of 5. And then the weird one that brought a lot of confusion, at least within the Pitcher List Discord at first, because it wasn't really worded really well, was that a pitcher, if they start warming up at the start of an inning, they must face at least one batter. And the way I read it at first was like that, like warming up where? Like warming up in the bullpen, warming up, just getting up off the bench. Like what defines a warm up? I've gathered by this point, it's if a pitcher comes out onto the mound and throws a warm up pitch, they are officially in the game for that inning, and they have to face at least one batter. Is there anything in general that you see of these new rules that we're going to be experiencing for 2024 that will impact either the way you draft, the way you target certain categories or certain players?
I don't think so. We talked about the pitch clock being trimmed by a couple of seconds with runners on base a few weeks ago when it first came up. I just don't think that things are going to affect that much, and I definitely don't know how they will affect things. So I really can't take them into account, or I definitely don't want to, not knowing what effects they might have. If I'm wrong, then you're doubling down on something that's not going to matter. I was confused a little bit with the warm up as well. Hearing a little more about it, it's something that only happened a few times last season.
21 times total. Yeah. Crazy.
So that's definitely not an issue. I don't think the mound visits is intriguing to me. I think that it may take some getting used to by the managers and pitching coaches in game. So we may see some effects early in the season until they get used to only being allowed 4 mound visits. However, I don't think it's anything actionable on our part.
Yeah, fair. I think the thing that stood out to me the most was obviously the shortened pitch clock. We saw the results from last year in general, and now we're seeing a little bit of a shorter clock with runners on base, which obviously impacts the running game and how the pitchers hold those runners in place. So we'll see if, again, more than likely it'll be the runners that are already running taking full advantage of this added couple of seconds. And, it'll probably be in spot starts here or there, or spot situations. The joke is that Esteury Ruiz now will steal 90 bases instead of 70 bases or something crazy like that. So he did go a lot earlier in this draft than he did in our last 12-teamer. He did not drop. Maybe it was part of our because of our conversation we had in the last episode or not. I'm not sure. But that extreme change in one category can, make a difference if that's the way your team had been built in lacking that category. All right. So the other big news that happened literally must have been like a couple hours after we finished recording was the Dodgers added to their rotation, snagging Yoshinobu Yamamoto to he signed to a 12-year deal with the Dodgers. He'll be spending pretty much his entire major league career with them, right alongside Shohei Ohtani once he's able to pitch back starting in 2025 probably. Is this probably one of the more obvious places that he could have signed? And I mean, does it seem like this is where I'm going to be the most comfortable? Not to mention the money. We won't even get into the money. But comfort level has to play a bigger role, a pretty decent role too, especially when you're coming from overseas. You have to acclimate yourself into a new environment, a new league, new player, new teammates, all that. And to be able to pick a location where you have a little bit more control over that assimilation had to have been a major factor in his decision without, obviously knowing what went through his mind, his agent's mind, and all that. What's your overall thoughts on Yamamoto going to the Dodgers? Muted.
Yeah, I thought this is a nice spot for Yamamoto, and one of the, if not the favorite spot, if I had to choose ahead of time where I thought he was going to end up, it probably was LA. This is intriguing all of a sudden, right? The Dodgers pitching staff last year, due to injuries, wasn't very deep. All of a sudden now, Tyler Glasnow, Yamamoto, we do Walker Buehler coming back, depending on how he bounces back from injury. Bobby Miller. All of a sudden, there's four guys right there. I don't know which one they'll throw out opening day. Right? I could see any one of the four. All of a sudden, this is looking like a nice staff with that lineup, and probably some guys we want on our fantasy teams. I have not been able to pull the trigger on Yamamoto yet. He's been in my queue. He goes just a little earlier than I'm ready. He went as the last pick of the 4th round in the 15 team draft that we've been referencing, that we have going on right now. I had him towards the top of my queue coming up in the 5th round. I'm picking 9th, so he went 10 picks before I had a chance. But I'm going to try to get him somewhere on a team or two, just to have not been able to yet. I think this is a great spot for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's great about where he went, of course, the other major teams that were in line for services apparently were the San Francisco Giants he was considering. Everybody was talking about the Yankees pushing hard for him as well, and kind of like the final 3 teams looking to add him to their rotation. With the Dodgers, he doesn't have to be the center of attention. Like, he would have been the center of attention in San Francisco easily, especially in that rotation. I mean, obviously they have other pieces, but just name recognition, being on the West Coast, with the Dodgers, they have so many other star pieces in their roster. Maybe not so much in the rotation. Like, he still will be the 1 or the 2. He will definitely start one of the first 2 games, right, as they play the Padres in Korea, in South Korea, for the opening 2-day series a little bit early, which, by the way, is something to note. The way I was talking to Greg Ambrose of NFBC, the way that the scoring is going to work, there will not be a fab period before those games, and you're going to be able to set your rosters after those games have concluded. And so if you do put in a Padre or a Dodger into your lineup for the first week, you're going to get a free look, as we talked about last year with the outage that they had for that one day. So it'll be nice to see how Yamamoto does, and you'll be able to decide whether or not you want to put him in your week 1 pitching lineup, and anybody else on those 2 teams as well. But you have to assume he's going to start one of those 2 games, just on the road with, fans of that geographic region there to see him as well. Not that he won't draw fans in LA either, but it'll be interesting to see how he acclimates himself from the get-go.
Yeah, on that note, Adam, I saw that conversation you were having with Greg Ambrosius and in the NFBC Discord, which, if you haven't gotten into that yet, it's a great little chat room to pick things up. A little side note, but Phil Dussault chimed in, and this is a great point, right? If a random reliever gets a win in that 2-game series, pick them up in that first fab period and throw them in your 3-day lineup for the weekend to start the season, and you will get that one win. He said he did that in 2019 when we had overseas games. There was a random reliever, got the win, picked him up, chalk up a win. We'll take all of them we can get.
Most of the leagues I've drafted so far have been our listener leagues, so I'm very upset that you put that out there, because I'm very curious to know what kind of fab dollars we're going to see for guaranteed stats. Like, I mean, we put in fab dollars for, like, hey, what do we think we could get out of this player? But if you know for sure you could get a win or a save or, something random for a guy that you normally wouldn't throw more than $1 on,
I mean, a utility player steals 3 bases in the 2 games.
Yeah,
how much is that
2
worth?
home runs, 8 RBI, something crazy. How much is that worth? That 1 game worth of stats, but it's guaranteed. You can bank it. Right. So we'll see how that goes in late March. All right, some smaller signings. Obviously, that's the big guy that everybody's talking about. It happened about a week ago, but we've got a couple other smaller ones. Toronto did not have Yamamoto on a plane to eat sushi. They grabbed Kevin Kiermaier to come back to Toronto for another year. They also brought in Isiah Kiner-Falefa to a 2-year deal in Toronto. And obviously these are filler pieces, kind of filling out the roster, maybe not key aspects, but do you see either of these guys being able to carve out everyday playing time to actually be a surprise piece for what is still a decent offense in general, or these role players is something that you're just looking at in, a deep DC?
I think Kevin Kiermaier probably gets close to everyday playing time as the roster sits right now here at the end of December. He's going to play center field, and they like his defense, and he'll be out there. Looks like Dalton Varsho moves to left, George Springer's in right. They have a couple of guys that can come in off of the bench, but I think Kiermaier, for the most part, is their center fielder. If we're looking at his 408 plate appearances in 2023, health has been a bit of an issue, but with Kiermaier, it seems like it's been more of the fluky type injuries that we don't worry about lingering or re-injuring some of this same body parts. I think just a little over 400 plate appearances last year, double-digit stolen bases, decent batting average, even hitting at the bottom of this lineup. It's not the Dodgers, Braves, Rangers, but a lineup that we think should have performed better in 2023, and we probably expect to in 2024. So he's hitting in front of George Springer, Bo Bichette, Vlad Guerrero. I think there's opportunity for runs scored here, and I think he's somebody going pretty late in drafts right now that is probably going to rise up as we see more and more 15-team leagues be drafted, and it continues to look like he's probably going to get the everyday or close to everyday playing time.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's nice that they have the backup of Varsho being able to come in there in center field when Kiermaier. I mean, I know you said that there's fluky injuries, but they just happen to him, Kiermaier, all the time. He finds a way to miss time, whether he was with Tampa or just the time missed in Toronto. And so it'll be, we'll see what happens. If he's at the top of the lineup, though, it doesn't matter. He's still valuable while he's playing. And he's healthy right now. He'll be healthy to start the season, presumably. And so that's something to keep in mind. And if they allow him to run, Kiermaier's always been somebody who could run. It's just whether or not you want to allow him to take that risk of, not getting hurt again. And then Kiner-Falefa, obviously David Snyder is their second baseman most of the time, or at least he made a big name for himself last year with his power surge, especially against lefties. But what do you see his role being here? To me, this signing made no sense because it does feel as though Toronto has a bunch of players better than Kiner-Falefa coming up through their system between Nazenberger or Elvis Martinez, who can play or can be forced to play multiple infield positions, namely second base, third base. Then Kevin Biggio obviously making a little bit of a name for himself in the second half as well. Is Falefa, can he? I mean, we probably said the same thing about him when he signed with the Yankees, and he found a way to be an everyday player there too. So is that going to happen in Toronto?
It could, and that's exactly where I was going to go. With the Yankees, we did not expect him to get the playing time he did. Injuries happen. He's a serviceable Major League Baseball player. He's going to find his way into the lineup once those types of things start happening. My first thought when I saw this, and then I realized he doesn't play center field, and it appears they want Kiermaier to play center field. But my first thought is, why not just re-sign Whit Merrifield? They signed 2 players to do what Whit Merrifield could do.
Right.
So that was my first thought. Then if they want to get Varsho out of center, let Kiermaier play center, improve the defense a little bit, I get that end of it. But yeah, he's going to start out as a utility guy. You start seeing him get playing time, especially against right-handed pitching. Probably it's watch the matchups, and this is going to be a big in-season maintenance type thing with him. But it's somebody you don't want to forget about, and then realize, oh, he's played every day for the last 2 weeks, and someone else grabs him for a couple bucks before you do.
You remember Whit Merrifield had that no trade clause in Kansas City, and there was a lot of hoopla about whether or not he was going to waive it depending on what team. If I'm not mistaken, it was a full no trade clause, and he waived it to go to Toronto. Maybe he decided, that was the wrong move. I don't want to be here for long term. So the Blue Jays had to, make different adjustments, knowing that they weren't going to bring him back. And then maybe Toronto didn't want to bring him back. You don't know these things until they come out in the tell-all books or like the retirement speeches or something like that. All right. Another smaller move. A couple of catchers, or at least catcher eligible players, made some signings. And I'll just list all 3 of these, as often curious to know. Well, I think I know which one makes the biggest impact here, but Martin Maldonado, no longer with Houston, opening the door, which we already knew was open for Yanir Diaz in Houston to be the everyday backstop there. But he signed a 1-year deal. Maldonado does with the Chicago White Sox. He does have a vesting option for a 2nd year, so he could be in Chicago for the next 2 years. Francisco Mejia, he signed a minor league deal with the Angels. He did get an invite to spring training, as of course they let Max Stassi go via trade. There could be an opportunity for somewhat everyday playing time in Anaheim. And then Mitch Garver signs a 2-year deal with Seattle, presumably to be their everyday DH, and then also maybe a backup catcher to Cal Raleigh. I said I think I know which one makes the biggest impact, and I'm going to go with Mitch Garver, especially if he does get that everyday playing time as the DH, not having to worry about getting hurt behind the plate, and he still has catcher eligibility in just about every format. Do you have any viewpoints of the other 2 smaller signings, whether they're going to end up being, backup catchers, or they could back their way into enough playing time to volume their way into relativity?
It's not about their playing time. It's about whose playing time they could hurt, right? I don't think Francisco Mejia hurts Logan O'Hoppe much, if at all. So I'm not really worried about that one. Martin Maldonado, this one's interesting, right? Because we already had Corey Lee fans were in a bit of a bind due to the Max Stassi signing. And I thought, Max Stassi in deep leagues, deep 2-catcher leagues might be an option. Now Martin Maldonado is there as well. I don't think I'm interested in any of the catchers for the Chicago White Sox any longer. Not that it was huge interest to begin with, but I just think catchers for Chicago White Sox are all crossed off. I don't know that any of them are going to get the playing time, especially with the performance we expect from them in that limited playing time. So I think it's more about the other players that these signings affect than Maldonado and Mejia themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the name that gets forgotten about with all these catchers signing with the White Sox is Yasmani Grandal, still out there as a free agent, whether or not he finds a new home to become relevant, or at least be given the chance to become relevant again. I mean, not obviously, because I feel like there's been a lot of catcher moves this offseason that have been more than surprising, with, Christian Betancourt moving to the Miami Marlins, bringing in another catcher, the carousel of catchers that have been happening in Cleveland, it seems, impacting Bo Naylor's possible timeshare there. But Grandal, I would assume that's all but solidifies him not returning to the White Sox with all the options that they currently have behind the backstop as well. All right. Moving on to another smaller trade that kind of happened, not under the radar per se, but, may have less impact than you really want it to. But the Yankees traded away Estevan Florial, outfielder. I don't think he has prospect eligibility anymore, but regardless, he's going to Cleveland. And Cleveland is sending, or has sent, Cody Morris to the Yankees. Can either one of these guys create a foothold into relevancy with their new teams, whether it's Cody Morris in a bullpen role, possibly as a spot starter for the Yankees, or Florial actually getting, enough regular playing time in that outfield in Cleveland to make us want to actually draft them?
With Cody Morris, he's somebody that comes up from time to time. He has on our show over the past couple of seasons. He's shown some flashes when he was with Cleveland and had a couple of short opportunities. He's somebody definitely to keep an eye on. You just never know what sort of adjustment, minor tweak in mechanics, minor change in pitch usage, anything that go into a new team, something they've seen that could really improve a player. So definitely want to keep an eye on Cody Morris. Not somebody I'm going to be drafting right now, but somebody to look at. Florial is also interesting. It seems like Cleveland is making this just 180-degree switch from, for years, it's been all of these high contact, no power players. And now all of a sudden they're signing and trading for all of these guys with a 30% strikeout rate, but with power. Depending on that strikeout rate and walk rate for Estevan Florial, he may work his way into everyday playing time in the outfield for Cleveland. Right now it's Miles Straw, Ramon Laureano, Stephen Kwan. If they want some pop and he can manage that strikeout rate, and when he does make contact, they are sailing over the outfield wall, then Florial could make his way. I'd be interested in Florial in draft champions leagues, draft and hold leagues right now at his draft position, just with the shot that he may be able to get close to full-time playing time.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, and we'll jump right into the final note here. Smaller bullpen moves. Two teams added to possibly the back end of their bullpen usage, with Detroit Tigers signing Shelby Miller to a short deal, and then the White Sox signed Tim Hill, who is non-tendered, I believe, from the Padres. And I couldn't read this well enough to know for sure, but whether or not Jeff Passan was actually making a joke about the possibility of him seeing plenty of high opportunity usage with the Chicago White Sox. Again, I don't know if it was a joke toward the White Sox not actually providing that many opportunities of high leverage situations, or if Tim Hill will actually see those opportunities. Do you see either one of these guys kind of scratching their way into the ninth inning for either the Tigers or the White Sox?
It's possible. I mean, but I don't know that it's worth spending too much time worrying about.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, Ross, when you look at the White Sox bullpen and what we expect the White Sox wins and therefore save opportunities to be going into 2024, sure, of Gregory Santos, Garrett Crochet, Jimmy Lambert, Tim Hill, Devi Garcia, Tim Hill could get some saves out of that bunch. Absolutely. I think that's a possibility. I don't think there's enough of them available to worry about it.
Yeah, that's fine. It's the same conversation we have about the bullpen in Oakland, the bullpen in Colorado, and a couple of other teams as well. And if you don't have a set guy, for sure. If you have a set guy in those situations, and for sure they are the closer, and they're going to be the closer at least for the first half,
then they're underrated.
Absolutely, exactly. But when you have a mix and match, or too many question marks, why ask the question? All right. plenty of news still to come, and we will get to them as they come across the desk. But now we are going to move into the crux of the episode, where we talk a little bit about episode's coming out on New Year's Eve. So we're going to talk a lot about the players who find themselves either with the potential of going to a new team, new year, new me, that type of thing, whether it was via trade or pending free agency. And we're going to get to all that right after this break. All right, we are back. Of course, you're still listening to On the Wire. And Kevin, for this first section, we're going to talk specifically about the free agents that are still on the board that in all likelihood, they will be changing teams. It's one of those things where it's like, if they were going to come back, you almost expected them to already have signed by now. We saw that with Lourdes Gurriel Jr. We saw that with a couple other players that have re-signed with their teams. And of course, things could change. You could still see these players sign with the same team, but I'm expecting them to change teams. And we're going to play Ask with this group of players. We got I think there's about 6 groupings here of players that are in similar situations. They're pitchers, they're corner infielders, or outfielders, what have you. And I've grouped them together based on ADP over the last month. So specifically in Draft Champions. So of course I wanted to make sure that we got some deeper options in there as well. And of course, we know that the gladiators and the best balls, they really impact the overall ADP that we see on the NFBC. So there were 10 drafts completed when I ran this ADP from December 1st to December 28th. So keep that in mind, the sample size and all that. But again, these groupings are all going to be players who have not signed as of this recording, and they are all pretty evenly matched when it comes to their draft position and the positions that they are going to fill for their major league rosters. So we'll start here at the top. I left off guys like Blake Snell, who are going in the top 70 of drafts, and I don't have an equal to match him up with, so it doesn't really matter how you feel about him. So we'll jump into another set of pitchers here that are all going in the 200 range, so between ADP of 220 to 283. We have Lucas Giolito. Let me recap how to play Ask. I know you know how to play Ask because you've been doing a really good job of playing by the rules. For those who have not heard this game before, it's our version of MFK, and we'll just leave it with the initials on that. It's a family-friendly podcast. Ask is you have to pick. You have 3 players. You have to avoid one of them. That's the A. You get to stream another one. That's the S. And you've got to keep the third one. That's the K. And the draft equivalent of this is avoid is you can't even draft them. You wouldn't even draft them in a DC, in a 50 round draft and hold. The streaming one is guys that you wouldn't draft in a standard 12 team Fab league, but you would pick them up throughout the season using Fab. And the keep would be you have to draft them in a gladiator. Thus, they'd be in your starting lineup all year round. You wouldn't have a choice. So right here, you've got to do one of each for these guys. Lucas Giolito, he ended the season with Cleveland Guardians. We don't know where his future will be, and that's going to be the same for everybody here. Shota Imanaga has not signed yet. I expect, I think his deadline is early January, if I'm not mistaken. So we should see that, maybe even possibly by the time this comes out, but more likely it'll be closer to the deadline. And Marcus Stroman, he's at the late end of this ADP range at 283 in the last month. Of course, he opted out of his deal with the Chicago Cubs and is looking for a new home possibly. I ask you the same question I'm going to ask you for all these guys. Kevin, Giolito, Imanaga, Stroman, who you keeping, who you streaming, and who are you avoiding?
Well, of all these guys, I like Lucas Giolito the most. However, I don't want him in a gladiator because if things go like they did in 2023, you don't want him set in that lineup for the entire season with the ratio damage that could occur. So he's my streamer, Giolito. That means I have to avoid either Imanaga or Stroman, and that's tough. But I think for one of these guys to put in my lineup and they have to stay all season long, I'll go with the upside of Imanaga. And as much as I like Marcus Stroman, by default, he's my avoid here out of this group.
I had a similar. I thought you were going to go the other way. I thought you were going to go with like the floor of Stroman as your keep, based on where you were going. If I'm going in that direction, though, if I'm going with the upside, I'm probably keeping Giolito just because I know what he can do. Like, and granted, yes, he can kill your whip. I am less concerned about him moving to a new team and making changes accordingly quicker than I would trust Imanaga making changes from Japan to the US on a whim. And if he, you're going to have to take the first half of Imanaga in a Gladiator the same as you would have to take maybe his second half that's a little bit better after making adjustments and getting assimilated and all that. So I'm also biased. I've grabbed Giolito in more than a handful of my drafts already. And regardless of your format, if you draft somebody in like the 220 range, you're more than likely starting him on a regular basis until you're able to stream him out of your rotation in the first couple months of the season. So just something to consider, and how much you trust any of these guys to make the changes, because all of these guys are going to have to make some kind of adjustments just by changing teams. Stroman has done that already, and we'll say that Giolito has had to do that a couple times, and he's failed in just about every time he's changed teams just this past season. All right, a little bit lower down the ADP range here, we've got some free agent pitchers still on the market. James Paxton leaving the Red Sox. There are rumors that the Red Sox are still looking to bring him back, but as of right now, he is going at ADP of 365. We have Sean Manaea leaving the San Francisco Giants. He's a free agent as well at 388. And then Mike Clevinger, last seen with the Chicago White Sox, being drafted right now just inside the top 400 at 395. All right. Avoid, stream, keep these three guys. Kevin, what do you got?
This is James Paxton, right? It's such a conundrum. When he was healthy in 2023, we saw some of what we remember of good James Paxton. It's been a while since we'd seen that. He gets injured so often. But with all of these guys going so late, the earliest ADP 365, I think he's the one I want to take a chance on. He gave up 48 earned runs in 96 innings pitched in 2023, but 16 of those earned runs were in the final 3 appearances of the season, and where he pitched a combined 9 2/3 innings. So up to that point, he had a really nice season going since he came back in mid-May for the Red Sox. His injury that caused him to miss the final month of the season is knee inflammation. So my hope is that type of injury is something that has healed by now, and he's on a normal offseason throwing program. And that's the assumption I'm going to go with here. Now, it doesn't mean I expect James Paxton to stay healthy all season long, but all 3 of these guys have question marks, that being his biggest one, just health and staying on the field. At this point in the draft, I think he has the most upside. And so that's where I'm going to take my shot. So I'm keeping James Paxton here, or even putting him on a Gladiator team. Completely contradicts what I will say about other players health-wise and in that situation.
Well, you get so many of these risky picks, right? And if you choose to use your limited resources of risky picks on Paxton, then so be it.
Right. So with these guys, I'm going with Paxton and hoping he stays healthy for 100 to 120 innings. I think at this point in the draft, we get a good 100 innings out of James Paxton. That's worth it. Sean Manaea is going to be my streamer because I think he's going to be valuable as a streamer, and this is exactly the kind of guy that we'll be talking about throughout the season on our weekly fab prognosis for each week, depending on matchups, depending on how they've been using him in long relief. Is he making spot starts? Has he made his way into the rotation? Sean Manaea is a guy that we're going to talk about as a streamer throughout the season, and I think that's perfect. And I just don't have much interest in Mike Clevenger these days. So, Paxton keep, Manaea stream, and I'll avoid Clevenger.
Yeah, I think Manaea is going to be, it's really going to depend on where he goes and how they use him. Like, where Clevenger is going to go and how he's going to want to be used. He's not going to be the guy that is okay getting into the bullpen unless he's just the obvious seventh guy in that possible rotation. And he's on a competing team with a long history. But Manaea could go either way, anywhere. I mean, we saw how the Giants used him, and obviously he was trying to make good on that contract to, catapult him into a new contract, which is where he finds himself right now. So we'll see who ends up picking him up, and then you can pontificate on how he's going to actually be used by his new team. All right, let's move on to some hitters here. I'm going to skip over Cody Bellinger because, again, same thing. He's going at ADP of 56. There's not really a free agent that's going around the same time place as him. I also don't think it matters so much where he ends up going unless he goes to a Colorado or a Cincinnati or something like that. He's going to be used how he's going to be used. The guys I will focus on are ranging between ADP of 155 to 211. And it's a mixed match of positions, mostly DH type players, but they have eligibility elsewhere. Teoscar Hernandez, last seen in Seattle, and all the rumors swirling around Boston, bringing him in probably as a part-time outfielder, almost everyday DH situation there. Jorge Soler, he decided not to return to Miami. And so he is in the market for a new team. Again, outfield eligibility, but probably best served as a regular DH for his new team. And then Rhys Hoskins in Philadelphia, or last seen in Philadelphia, looking for a new home, probably either filling in at first base or also DH first type of player at this point in his career. He's a late one at 211. Soler is currently at an ADP of 163, and then Hernandez at 155. So you've got to fill one of these spots in all these different drafts. Who are you avoiding, streaming, and keeping with these three hitters?
I like all three of these guys. I have drafted all three of these guys for 2024. My keep is going to be Jorge Soler. I just think his power plays anywhere he lands, so I'm not worried too much about ballpark. And when healthy and in the lineup, he's going to hit for that power. As much as I like Rhys Hoskins, just the entire year off and those question marks, since I like all three of these guys and they're fairly close in ADP, due to those questions, I will avoid Rhys Hoskins out of this group. Although, like I said, I'm not avoiding him. I have drafted him. Teoscar Hernandez is really intriguing to me, and I believe I did draft him in a Gladiator. If I didn't, I at least considered it. But he'll be my streamer here by default. But I think Teoscar Hernandez is one of these guys that we're disappointed in the season they just had, and I'm not so sure why. Right? He had more home runs in 2023 than in 2022, only by one, but he had more. He had more stolen bases. He had quite a few more RBI, one less run scored. He still hits, in that 250 to 260 range. I'm not sure why everybody is so down on Teoscar Hernandez. Sure, wherever he ends up landing is probably going to send him up or down in draft position, probably up just because we're going to be talking about him a little more. But I think, a 25 to 30 home run and more than a handful of stolen base guy with the RBI, with the batting average that doesn't hurt you, I think he's kind of getting dinged more than he should for what was thought to be a disappointing 2023, when we shouldn't have been expecting necessarily 32 home runs and double-digit stolen bases like he had in 2021 with Toronto anyway. So, but I really like Soler, so he's my keep for sure.
Yeah, and I get the point about Soler. His power is going to play anywhere. We saw what he did in Kansas City. We saw what he could still do in Miami. Not ballparks you think of as, power friendly ballparks, home ballparks. I look at Teoscar and seeing all the rumors go put him in Fenway Park. That plays a big factor, but he hasn't signed there yet. He could go somewhere that not so much saps his power, but this isn't a 40 home run guy like Soler could be. This is a 20 to 25 home run guy, as you pointed out. And possibly he goes into a ballpark like Fenway that plays up. He can get closer to that 30 mark. But regardless of ballpark, he's still not the 40. It is nice that he gets that handful of stolen bases that Soler's probably not providing you. But I would agree with you 100% on Hoskins being the avoid here. And not so much Hoskins himself, but just the fact that if you look at ADP and your room is still kind of abiding by it a little bit, the first basemen that are, or first base eligible players that are going around him, they are plentiful. And they are all very similar in what you would expect in production to even a healthy Hoskins. Maybe Hoskins brings a little bit more power to the table, but between Ryan Mountcastle, Andrew Vaughn, even Jaime Candelero going a little bit later than that, there's a lot of first basemen, whether they're your corner or they're starting first baseman, a lot of options that, all right, if I miss out on Hoskins, I'm perfectly fine grabbing somebody right around that same spot that'll provide me with something similar.
Absolutely. This is one thing that I have noticed and made a point of it finally in this most recent draft that we have going right now. After the first handful of drafts that I had done, and during those drafts, this group of first basemen that you're talking about, all available, I'm interested in all of them. Isaac Paredes, yes, he's eligible at third base as well. Vinny Pasquantino, even Nathaniel Lowe. You mentioned Candelario and Andrew Vaughn. I really like this group of first basemen, but in my earliest drafts, I was taking Freddie Freeman, Pete Alonso, some of the top first basemen, and I realized I need to stop doing that. I can get an elite player at a different position because these first basemen are plentiful later in the draft. And the narrative that I've been hearing is not everybody, but it still seems like a lot of people are talking about first base being fairly thin. And I have found it to be the opposite.
I think it's more of the situation that we talk about with shortstop. It's like the position's not thin, but there's a cliff. And there's an obvious cliff. All right, let's do maybe a couple more of these offensive guys. We're going to jump a little bit further down in ADP from in the 243 to 287 range here. Guys are a little bit tighter in ADP. Again, these are, well, one of them is specifically a DH, but kind of a DH spot, more than likely kind of those auxiliary positions like corner infield or like your fourth or fifth outfielder. But you be the judge here, Kevin. JD Martinez still available in that range at 243. Not coming back to the Dodgers. Go somewhere else. Still going to be DH, and it'll be very unlikely he regains anything outside of that eligibility in fantasy circles. Matt Chapman still hasn't re-signed with Toronto. This is where I'm of the opinion he's not going to if he hadn't already. And Tommy Pham. Probably not signing back with Arizona with their outfield situation, with bringing back Lourdes Gurriel Jr. and having the rest of that team intact. He is at the end of this range at 287 ADP currently. So again, JD Martinez, Matt Chapman, Tommy Pham. Who you avoiding, streaming, and keeping of this bunch?
Unfortunately, as much as I love him, I am avoiding Tommy Pham. Just due to the fact that where he lands is that there's going to be a big playing time questions until we know where he lands, what the lineup looks like, and then even into spring training and maybe early in the season to see how he's going to be used. He was great for a lot of our fantasy teams in 2023. He had to play his way into everyday playing time throughout the season. He did, and then was very valuable, but we have to worry about that. Excuse me. These other two guys, I've drafted them both, JD Martinez, Matt Chapman. I think as much as I've drafted JD Martinez more, I'm confident he's going to land in a spot where he is the everyday designated hitter. However, I'm going to go with Matt Chapman. I think his playing time is more guaranteed, even though I think JD Martinez is very safe. Matt Chapman's defense is going to put him in the lineup every day, wherever he lands at third base. So I'm going to, unfortunately, just stream JD Martinez here and keep Matt Chapman, and also, unfortunately, avoid Tommy Pham because I do like him.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Pham is the one that where he goes will determine his value more so than the other two guys, for sure. So a lot more question marks. And if you want to put somebody like that into your gladiator, you might be forced to have to do so. But if you're given the choice, you probably want to avoid that situation at this point. You may not have a chance to sign or to draft a signed Tommy Pham in a gladiator, as the final gladiators are filling up rather quickly, and those
probably
should
be full by the time this airs.
Absolutely, yeah. And those last draft is in the middle of January, so no guarantee he signs before then as well. Last two groups here, and then we'll move on to some guys that were traded. These are much later in your drafts. Right, this first group is going to be right before ADP of 400. Again, all free agents. These guys are all hitters in different positions. Yoan Moncada, we'll see if he signs back with the White Sox, but he is a free agent. Adam Duvall, last seen in Boston at ADP of 397. And then Harrison Bader, not patrolling center field in New York anymore, at 399 ADP in these most recent 10 draft champions that I was looking at. So again, between Moncada, Duvall, and Bader, side question, which one of these guys is most likely to sign overseas before they actually sign with the major league team? Because they all seem like they could. They all seem like they kind of fit into this mold of a guy who could go out, either remake themselves overseas rather than signing a part-time deal with a major league club. But you've got to draft one of these guys in Gladiator. You can fab one of them, and you can avoid the other one.
Yeah, this one's tough. They all obviously have question marks. They're going close to pick 400. So there's a reason that they're going that late in drafts. I really liked what Adam Duvall did last season, early in the year when he was still healthy with the Red Sox. And I feel like he could probably do that for somebody where he lands. And I also feel like he's going to look to sign with a team where he believes he's getting the playing time. I don't think it's just money, just being a contender. I think he also wants to play. He still believes that. So I'm going to go with Adam Duvall as my keeper. A little hesitantly, but that's where I'm going to go. We talked about Harrison Bader quite a bit a few weeks back about it all being about health. That's going to make him my streamer. When healthy, I'd love to have him in my lineup. And Yoan Moncada just has not been good, at least as far as fantasy production goes, since 2019. The stolen bases are gone. He hasn't stolen more than 3 bases in a season since 2019, including 1 with the new rules in 2023. Barely getting to double-digit home runs over the past couple of seasons. Granted, playing time, only 350 to 400 plus plate appearances. There's just not a lot there for me to worry about. Of course, in a draft Champions League really late, he's still hanging out there. He could end up being valuable in the second half for our teams. He's not somebody we're going to want to be counting on early in the season, in my opinion. So Moncada is going to be my avoid just based on not much fantasy production at all in 5 years now. So I'll go with Duvall as my keeper. And I definitely Bader when healthy. That makes him a streamer.
Makes sense to me. I agree with all those points on that one. We'll jump into the last one here as we move even further down ADP, which makes the keeper selection here all that much more interesting. Gary Sanchez, free agent. We talked about a couple catchers finding or catcher eligible players, finding new teams, whether it's through many trades that have happened or through free agency. He is still a free agent. Of course, last seen in San Diego. Eddie Rosario, free agent out of Atlanta. He's at ADP 441. And Jock Peterson, leaving San Francisco probably, finding a new home. We'll see how he gets used with his new team, currently going at an ADP of 483. I'm of the opinion that Jock Peterson has the most to gain or lose he's kind of like the Tommy Pham of this group, where it depends on where he signs and what kind of usage he's going to see with his new team. But where do you put Sanchez, Rosario, and Peterson based on you got to avoid, you got to stream, you got to keep each one of these guys?
Excuse me. Well, Gary Sanchez is like some of the catchers we talked about earlier, in my opinion, right? Backup catcher, designated hitter. He may not find his home right away. He might be moved a couple of times in season. And with some of those other catchers already finding new teams, the spot for a guy like this is becoming harder to find. So Gary Sanchez is my avoid here. Eddie Rosario and Jock Peterson. This is fascinating to me. Very similar, both great on the strong side of a platoon at times in their career. I think we've seen more success from Eddie Rosario more recently. Jock Peterson has fallen off a little bit from when we could count on him to crush baseballs versus right-handed pitching in the past. I think for that reason, Eddie Rosario is my keeper. I think at a minimum, he gets the strong side of platoon at bats wherever he lands. He was that good for Atlanta in 2023 in that respect. We expect Jock Peterson to have the same opportunity. And both of these guys, we don't want to see getting at-bats against lefties. They're not going to add enough in counting stats in those plate appearances to make up for the damage they will take in batting average, in my opinion. But just due to more recent success, Eddie Rosario will be my keeper and Jock Peterson my streamer.
All right. Let's wrap that up as far as the pending free agents that are still out there and the teams that they could be jumping into. And Kevin, I'll ask you some more questions regarding players that have seen a change in uniform based on the trades that they were part of for the most part. And we'll get to that after this second break. All right, you're still listening to On the Wire. I am Adam Howe, of course, with Kevin Hasting, as always. We are going to jump right into some more asks so we can get to as many of these players as possible. And all the players in here, with very few exceptions, they are guaranteed to be on a new team already because we've seen quite a few trades happen in this offseason. So I'm going to start off with this group that is really similar in ADP, or even actually a little bit later in ADP than the last group we just talked about, the free agents with Rosario, Peterson, and Gary Sanchez. Again, all three of these guys have been part of a trade. Two of them, the same trade, actually, going back and forth between their teams. Of course, I'm talking about Manny Margot going from Tampa Bay to the Dodgers as part of the Tyler Glasnow trade. He is got an ADP of 560 right now. And then on the other side, Johnny DeLuca headed to Tampa Bay. He's got an ADP of 545. So these guys are right back to back in ADP, and they're taking over each other's positions in their new teams. Trent Grisham, the third guy in this trio here, of course, moves from San Diego to the New York Yankees as part of the Juan Soto trade. So of these three guys going between ADP of 519 to 560, all outfielders, you've got to keep one of them, even though they're going so late in these drafts. Most of them would not be drafted in a normal gladiator. I'm forcing you to do it, and you can stream one of them, and you can avoid the third. What do we got, Kevin?
I think I'm going to start off with my avoid, and just due to the fact that I really think he's probably the short side of a platoon at best, and defensive replacement at times probably for the Dodgers. Unfortunately, Manny Margot, as much as I'd like to watch him play, he's my avoid here. Like I said, I think he's short side of a platoon for the Dodgers. The other two, this depends. Are we going upside or are we going floor here? And I think drafting this late, even though we're making it sound like we would take them in the top 450 players in a gladiator draft and leave them in our lineup all season long, I think I'm going to keep, I hate to do this. I'm going to keep DeLuca. I've been flip-flopping on this for the past couple of days since you put this list out. I really like Trent Grisham in New York with their outfield, the way it's set, we know the injury risk that many of their outfielders have. I think Trent Grisham can make his way into at least large side of platoon role with the Yankees and get to 450 plate appearances. DeLuca, I'm not as confident in that, but I think going to Tampa with his upside, that they made this move and they probably want to try to get him into the lineup. And if you ask me this question again tomorrow, I might completely change my answer. But I'm going to go ahead and keep DeLuca in this instance just for the upside play. I really like Trent Grisham, but I'll stream him for those at-bats versus right-handed pitching, and we'll let Margot go here.
Yeah, I mean, the Yankees, I think, if you really got to look at their roster and you realize, oh wait, they actually have a ton. First of all, they have a clog at DH, obviously with Stanton taking that position, so they don't have the flexibility of kind of rotating in extra at bats there. But between trading for Alex Verdugo and Juan Soto, and then obviously Judge, and now Grisham as well, they have an obvious four that will be manning the outfield throughout, and at least two of them are going to get 7 out of 7 days a week playing time, just
right
for obvious reasons. And so that kind of just leaves one position open to, see how much Verdugo and Grisham can get, and who gets off to a hot start, who can make a name for themselves in pinstripes first, maybe through spring training or throughout the month of April. So yeah, a lot more question marks in playing time in New York, I think, than in Tampa Bay. And I don't think I would have said that in any other normal scenarios.
Yeah,
all right.
Exactly.
All right, I'm going to jump up ADP quite a bit here. All guys, again, we talked about Alex Verdugo going to New York, so there's going to be the same conversation. So maybe has similar playing time question marks, but going a whole lot higher than his now teammate Trent Grisham. Verdugo going at 311. Going from Boston to New York. Tyler O'Neill fills his spot in Boston, being traded from St. Louis to the Red Sox, going at ADP of 244 this month. And then Jared Kelenic finding a new home in Atlanta after Seattle sent him down south. He's still going at ADP of 227. I have plenty of exposure to Kelenic already. I feel like he has gone a little bit later than this current ADP in the drafts that I've been able to grab him in. So I've been pretty happy about that. But I'm hoping to get at least one piece of Tyler O'Neill before draft season is over, because I love his new spot. And then Verdugo, we already talked about it. It has the playing time question marks in New York, but I'm curious to know where all these three guys land in the ask scenario.
Yeah, we talked about Tyler O'Neill a couple weeks ago and about loving this landing spot and just stay healthy. And I of these guys in a gladiator, I will take that risk that he can be healthy for at least 500 plate appearances, hopefully 600 plus. I'm going to gamble on the upside there. We know what Tyler O'Neill can do when he's healthy. I think for the reasons we just talked about with Trent Grisham, and you brought it up, it may end up being a playing time battle between Trent Grisham and Alex Verdugo. So for that reason, he is going to be my avoid here, Alex Verdugo. Kelenic, I would draft him in a Gladiator late, but by default here, he's going to be my streamer. It's going to be really interesting to see how he is used in Atlanta and where in the order. Right now, Roster Resource has him hitting in the 8th spot and being platooned with Vaughn Grissom as in that left field spot. Of course, he's on the large side. It's going to be, something definitely to keep an eye on. I think Kelenic can play his way into an everyday role and maybe even move up in the lineup a little bit. Not far, right? He's not moving above Ronald Acuna Jr., Ozzie Albies, Austin Riley, Matt Olson, even Marcell Ozuna. It's nice to see that they're at least projecting Michael Harris to move up to the middle of the order here a little bit, the middle third. So it'll be difficult for him to move more than a spot or two up in the lineup. I'm more concerned about that they think he may be platooned with Vaughn Grissom. We didn't see much, actually only 80 plate appearances from Vaughn Grissom at the major league level in 2023 when the Braves surprised everybody, not only signing Orlando Arcia, but then playing him pretty much on an everyday basis. But he's a young guy, still only 23 years old, so we might see him in there. Yeah, gives me a little bit of hesitancy with Kelenic. So yeah, for that reason, Tyler O'Neill's my guy, but I would stream Kelenic above Verdugo in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, we said the same thing about Michael Harris all season last year, not being like, yeah, you want him to be in the top third of the order, but it's like, how do you do that in a, in good conscience? And Kelenic, even more so now, moving into that role for Atlanta. All right, I'm going to jump to this one. This one's an interesting one because these guys are all going extremely late. You wouldn't normally draft any of these guys in a Gladiator, but I'm going to force you to in this situation. And that's where I'm curious to know which one of these guys you trust the most, even though none of them are really trustworthy at all at this point in their careers or where they're going to be at. So we have all second basemen here. Vidal Brujan gets traded over to Miami from Tampa Bay. Nicky Lopez gets traded up north from Atlanta to the White Sox, presumably playing second base for them. And then Elvis Andrus, still a free agent, so I had to lump somebody else in here. Elvis Andrus was with the White Sox, presumably, again, Nicky Lopez taking hit role in Chicago. And we'll see if Andrus actually signs somewhere. But you've got to make you're drafting right now in all these three scenarios that I'm talking about. You've got to draft one of these guys in a Gladiator. Who do you trust the most? And then who, no matter what, you're avoiding them. And by default, you'll have a streamer in there as well.
Yeah, unless Miami has seen something that they believe they can make some adjustments with Vidal Brujan. He's my avoid. It's just he hasn't hit at all at the major league level yet. We haven't seen that, so he's my avoid. I'm going with one of the veterans here, and I believe that we know where Nicky Lopez is playing, and at least large side of a platoon playing time, I think, and his defense will keep him on the field. We're probably not going to get the 300 plus batting average and 20 stolen bases we got a couple of years back when Nicky Lopez was in Kansas City, but throughout the minor leagues and a couple of seasons at the major league level, he has shown that he can hit for a decent to good batting average. He can steal some bases. It's a bad team context. Hitting the near the bottom of the White Sox lineup is definitely far from ideal. But I think right now, until I know where Elvis Andrus lands, I'm going to take what I believe is at least a 2/3 playing time share here. So Nicky Lopez is my keep, Elvis Andrus my streamer. That could flip flop depending on where Andrews signs. And I'm avoiding Vidal Brujan. I don't even think I would draft Vidal Brujan in a draft and hold at this point.
I just love the fact that Miami traded for another second baseman because they needed one desperately. So good on them. If they can get 9 second basemen out onto the field next season to opening day, I will not be surprised.
And John Birdie at shortstop.
Yeah. Yes. All right. All right. Let's move on to the pitchers now. We got quite a few pitchers that have moved to new teams via trade. Most of them later on in drafts. So we're going to start off here with the guys going anywhere between 519 and 624 in these last 10 DCs. Michael Soroka finds himself in Chicago with the White Sox, obviously being traded alongside Nicky Lopez from Atlanta. Adrian Hauser, we talked about just last episode, being traded from Milwaukee to the New York Mets. He's going at 582. And then Randy Vasquez, part of that Juan Soto deal, heading from New York to San Diego, presumably now in their rotation for the Padres. He is still being drafted at 624. With that trade being on the books for quite some time now, that's a pretty accurate ADP for all these guys. So, again, I ask you the same question. It was between Soroka, Hauser, and Vasquez. Who are you keeping, who are you streaming, and who are you avoiding?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm avoiding Michael Soroka. I think all of us are rooting for him as a Major League Baseball player, as a pitcher, that he gets healthy, stays healthy, and performs just, somewhat to what we expected of him prior to his devastating injury history. But unfortunately for our fantasy teams right now, I just don't see value there. I'm rooting for him, even though he won't be on any of my fantasy teams. I think I'm going with Adrian Hauser as my keeper. Like you said, we talked about him recently. I think there's some upside here. We like the ballpark. He's probably in that rotation in New York. I think I'm just a little more comfortable with him. Although I like Randy Vasquez, so I'll use him as my streamer here. I'm a little more comfortable with Adrian Hauser's role.
Yeah, that's exactly where my mind went when I made this list together. I'm like, oh, I mean, not that this list seemed like the more obvious one, but it's the fact that you're all but guaranteed to know what Adrian Hauser is going to be doing in New York. And though I alluded to Vasquez being, presumably in the rotation in San Diego, and it's probably the case, how he ends up being used throughout the course of the season, I think, is a little bit more in flux. Yeah. And I think I'll echo exactly what you said about Soroka. Like, you want him to succeed. It probably just won't be on any of my fantasy teams, unfortunately. Yeah. All right, let's jump up ADP quite a bit here. We're going to go with guys that are going within the top 200 in these DCs, starting with Ryan Pepiot, who was part of that Glasnow trade. He joins DeLuca over in Tampa Bay now. Again, presumably in that rotation for the Rays. Michael King, part of the Juan Soto trade. He continues to stay with teammate Randy Vasquez in San Diego. He's all but guaranteed to be in the rotation there. I don't think there's a lot less question marks there based on what we saw out of him at the end of last season. And then I got to fill out this trio here with a free agent, Jordan Montgomery, going right behind Michael King at ADP of 139, King at 140. Montgomery, last seen in Texas, has not signed with a new team yet. I haven't seen a lot of rumors either about where Montgomery might possibly be. I'm not sure it matters per se, unless he goes back to New York. And we kind of seen how New York utilized him and how his ups and downs in pinstripes. But unless he goes to a Colorado or Cincinnati, an obvious spot, I'm not sure, and correct me if you think differently, that it matters so much where Montgomery goes. Just the fact that he does sign, obviously we'll be talking about him more, and his ADP will go up regardless. That's just how it works. But as of right now, we've got Montgomery at 139, Michael King at 140, and Pepiot at 199. Who you keeping, who you streaming, and who are you avoiding of this bunch?
I have drafted Ryan PPO. And so he's my keeper here. Obviously, I guess it's not so obvious if there's something you don't like about one of these guys, especially at ADP, but all these guys are getting drafted. That's for certain. I'll take the little bit of a discount on Ryan PPO. I like that he's going to Tampa. It may bring down his innings a little bit, but I don't think so. I think that the Dodgers would have monitored his innings as well. I like that he brought the walk rate down in 2023. That was the key that we wanted to see from him. And now we might see him take another step. So with the discount and with the opportunity for more development, I'm going to go Ryan PPO here. Jordan Montgomery, I'm not going to avoid him in drafts, but he's going to be my avoid here, unfortunately. Just not knowing where he's going to be. Like you said, I don't think it matters a whole lot, but in this range of where Michael King, Jordan Montgomery are going, we're also seeing a lot of the lower tier relievers going in this range. Clay Holmes, Kenley Jansen, Adbert Alzolay, Craig Kimbrell, all. In fact, those four guys are going right before Jordan Montgomery and Michael King. And then after them, as far as starters, Chris Bassett, the upside of, Hunter Green, Bailey Ober, I've been drafting quite a bit, is being drafted almost 2 rounds later. I think I will take the upside of what we saw from Michael King when he was being stretched out in New York last season. And I think that he continues to develop into a starter in San Diego. So Michael King will be my streamer here. And unfortunately, by default, I'm avoiding Jordan Montgomery. Like you said, I don't think it matters where Montgomery ends up. I think he'll be just fine. You said something earlier in the show that I tend to agree with about the longer these things go, it seems to usually be less likely they go back to their former team. But I'm not so sure that that's the case with Jordan Montgomery and the Texas Rangers. I could see him going back to Texas still this offseason, obviously with their lineup. And as far as our chasing wins, that would be a great spot for him. I'm just taking the value at lower ADP in this situation.
I don't know why I feel like I've already seen Jordan Monk in my mind, in my headcanon. He's already signed with the Twins. It just seems like he's the type of pitcher who's going to sign with the Twins with
I'd
the
like
amount
that
of
too.
Yeah, I wouldn't be mad. Yeah. But with the amount of openings that they have had with the pitchers that they've lost to free agency between Maeda, Sonny Gray, and what have you, there are openings in that rotation, and they obviously have some young guys that we'd like to see get some more opportunity per se. But if they add one guy, they're not going to add a Blake Snell. They're not going to add the top of the heap. But Montgomery is, as close to the top of the heap as you can get without actually having to pay top freight. So we'll see, where he ends up going. But in my mind, he's already got a Twins uniform on for some reason. All right, I'm going to add one more in here. I skipped over, but I'm going to add this one in because I also want to give you an opportunity. You're on the clock in our draft league. I made my pick. We're picking back to back in that league. And I grabbed Yu Darvish as I went this draft, seeing how long I could go in a 15-teamer without picking a starter. And that streak had to be broken, of course, as we're picking back to back. And in 98th overall, I had to grab my first exposure of Cole Reagans because I somebody texted me about it, like, oh, you're making a statement in that league with picking Reagans at 98. And I'm like, well, I know I didn't have a choice. I mean, Kevin's picking right after me. And you didn't even pick a pitcher. Right. You picked Bogarts instead. I'm like, yeah, he still would have picked Reagans. I still feel like he probably would have.
Absolutely. Reagans was the top of the queue. And this is very timely and pertinent to several conversations that we have had in this episode. I'm looking at a starting pitcher here. Several of the guys we have talked about are available, and just a few picks earlier than his ADP, I'm going to get myself another share of Ryan PPO here.
All right, there we go. I did not plan that out. I did not know Kevin's pick beforehand. But but we're at right around that ADP. Like you said, we're at 189 in his ADP going into these, at least based on these 10 DCs that I used as my barometer here, is at 199. So talked about ignoring ADP. This isn't that example of that. At least based in the draft room. It is interesting
to me when you look at his, I hopefully our listeners know what I'm talking about. I think most of them do. On when you're looking at the player page and you can see the graph of how they've been drafted. He did have a little bit of spike when he went to Tampa, where he went earlier than his ADP a couple of times. But for the most part, he's been going a little later than he had been earlier in draft season. But I'm going to go ahead and grab him here. I'm not so certain he'd make it back to me.
Yeah, that's probably fair. It is nice to draft in the middle of the round, so you have less time to wait to whether or not they're going to make it back, but you still don't want to take that risk. As the later drafts go, the more people in the draft room start ignoring ADP. Some people take a little bit longer, some people a little bit earlier, but you got to start ignoring that a little bit quicker. All right, well, I'm going to add this last grouping. These are the latest of the late in the pitching category based on ADP here. All guys that have been traded. Two different situations, some terrible and some, the same. Marco Gonzalez got traded twice. Of course, started off in Seattle. He's going to end up in Pittsburgh to start the season, presumably. He's going at 677. Cal Quantrill, unfortunately, gets shipped out of Cleveland and ends up in Colorado. It's one of the first trades of this offseason. 715 is his ADP for obvious reasons. And Jared Schuster going from Atlanta to the White Sox as well. He's got an ADP. He's the latest ADP of this bunch at 731. And the latest news that I saw is that the White Sox are assuming that either Schuster or Soroka will be starting in their rotation, possibly both, but they would assume that at least one of those guys is going to make the opening day rotation here. With that in mind and anything else, you have to keep one of these guys in your gladiators. Of course, you have to stream. You can stream another one, and you can avoid the third one. You going to take the low-hanging fruit here, or you're going to get creative?
I'm not sure what you consider the low-hanging fruit. 100% here. I know Cal Quantrill has had flashes and recently where he's looked good, but not in Colorado for me. That does mean he could still be a streamer, but I think in this instance, he's going to be my avoid. I've always been a Marco Gonzalez fan. I know his numbers aren't great, but they're decent. I know he can have his blow-ups. He can also pitch well. He typically pitches late into games. I think he's definitely got a spot in the Pittsburgh rotation. Marco Gonzalez is going to be my keeper here. That leaves Jared Schuster as my streamer, and I agree with you. I'm not a huge fan of the White Sox as a team, as a landing spot for fantasy value for our teams, but he could be streamable at moments throughout the season, which is exactly what we're talking about here. So I'm going to keep Marco Gonzalez. Marco Gonzalez is really takes a jump for me in quality start leagues because there are so few guys that are counted on to go out there for 6+ innings these days. And if you can get out there with 3 earned runs or less, I like Marco Gonzalez a lot as a late flyer, especially in quality start leagues. But he's going to be my keeper here, regardless of the wins or quality starts. And take a flyer on Schuster as a streamer.
Yeah, I think what I was alluding to with the low-hanging fruit is just any pitcher in Colorado is going to be your avoid. So you took that fruit. Yeah. Nice. I mean, there's something to be said about, Cal Quantrill with all of his experience and what he can do, especially just eating innings on the road, in 2024, being a streamer. You stream him when he's not in Colorado. But there's, a lot to be said about having to adjust between pitching in Colorado and not pitching in Colorado, maybe every other start, maybe every, second or third start, whatever the schedule ends up turning out for him, and still having to make those adjustments makes it just as volatile on the road than it does, pitching in Colorado in and of itself. So, we'll see what he does to make those adjustments if he can. Probably not on our teams, like you said. And you won't have to draft him. He's going to be available. It's not as though he's getting picked up in these gladiators. None of these guys are. But yeah, I mean, especially in your rotation, I agree. Gonzalez makes the most sense in that scenario, just due to the floor, due to the stability. He's in the rotation. Pending any injury, every pitcher can be injured, and at some point in their career will be injured, unfortunately. But pending that, he's got a job all year round, and he's going to go out there every fifth or sixth day for the Pirates. All right, there were obviously some other players that were traded. I'm going to skip over those guys for now. They're not making as much of an impact. A bunch of catchers, like I talked about, they're just moving from backup catcher to backup catcher in their new roles as well. A couple other outfielders as well that we've talked about on previous shows. So just something to consider when players are moving to new teams, whether or not they're changing roles, they're getting a bigger role, less role, something you got to really consider, especially later on in your drafts and in those final gladiators. And now, if you're really knee deep into your drafts and holds, playing time is key, especially for those guys that you're going to be putting on your bench. Kevin, after all of that and anything else you want to consider, can you leave us with any other parting words for 2023 as the calendar flips over to 2024 and we continue to draft like crazy?
Yeah. Drafting like crazy. Keep in mind how much time you're going to have for your in-season maintenance of these teams. I've already started to schedule what my weeks are going to be like in season. Like, what days am I doing what for what teams? How much room do I have for additional teams as we're heading on into March? This was a big topic for me in Arizona this year. Not necessarily that it was brought up in panels this year. It had been in the past, but and Nick Pollock brought up the fact that the previous year in an NFBC panel with Vlad Sedler and some of the great NFBC players and Steve Weimer, always the example, right, of maximizing playing time and how he will outwork everybody in his league in season to maximize that playing time. And that is a conversation I was having with several people. 2020 was my most successful fantasy baseball season. And I don't think it had anything to do with the season being short. It had to do with I spent several hours every single day looking at my fantasy teams. And so that's what I want to try to maximize, the amount of time I can spend on each individual league. And as we start to accumulate these drafts that we love doing just to get into drafts, October, November, and December, it's time to start, I think, monitoring. Am I going to be able to keep an eye on these teams throughout the year?
Yeah, I wasn't going to jump into this 15-teamer, but I really wanted to see it get filled, and it did. And now I find myself with, I'm already got 4 fab leagues and the calendar hasn't flipped over yet. So it definitely crossed my mind, this thought that you're bringing to the table here. And we'll see how I adjust to that when it comes to, joining any more drafts in January. I did say I was going to focus my time in November, December on fab leagues, probably do some more draft and holds later on in the draft season rather than flipping it, which is what you see typically. So hopefully I can hold myself to that and then be able to spend the extra time in season managing the teams that need so. Not that you don't have to manage a DC or a draft and hold style league. You still
I think
got
the management of a DC is really underrated. When you have 50 players you're looking at twice a week to see who you're putting in those lineups. We think of them closer to a best ball, and they're really not.
No, a lot more management than probably you want to believe as you're drafting them. All right, well, that is going to do it for episode 144 of On the Wire. You can follow myself on the Twitter at 80grade. That's all spelled out. Kevin is at Hasting Kevin. Of course, follow the pod at On The Wire Pod. And after all that, I am Adam Howe on behalf of Kevin Hasting. Thanks for listening. We bid you goodbye.